What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're talking about American open wheel racing history, culminating in the original split, which led to the formation of karts. This is the first part of a series of videos I will be doing on the American open wheel Civil War, known as the split. But before we talk about the split, we need to talk about the original split, the one that nobody talks about today. First, here's my disclaimer. I'm just a fan. I'm not a historian who has combed every last detail, and I'm not a journalist with top-level access to all the people involved in this. I simply love open-wheel racing, obviously no secret that I'm an IndyCar fan, and I like history, so I've read a bit and wish to share what I consider one of the most fascinating times in racing with you guys, the viewer. So let us begin. To understand the split that culminated in May 1996, you need to understand the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Indy 500, and the United States Auto Club, more commonly referred to as USAC. Let's start with the race itself. The Indianapolis 500 has been one of the biggest races in the world forever. It's basically as old as organized racing itself, and it's been there the whole time, more or less. However, with all events, there are better periods than others, and for the Indianapolis 500, the first post-war golden era was in the late 50s through the early 70s. During this period, speeds exploded as qualifying speeds went from 145 mile per hour 4-lap averages to nearly 200 mile per hour 4-lap averages. The front-engine Roadster was replaced by the mid-engine layout we know today. Wings would prove themselves mandatory for any future cars to be competitive. And during this time period especially, wild experimentation was the name of the game. From more or less home-built specials built in a guy's garage, to four-wheel drive being toyed with and tinkered with, to aerodynamics, to shenanigans such as Smokey Yunick's legendary capsule car, which looks absolutely goofy, to turbine-powered cars, that's turbine as in freaking jet engine, nothing was off the table. Of course, you also had to have someone to drive these cars, and if there was one thing that the Speedway certainly wasn't short of, it was driving talent. Guys like Roger Ward, Parnelli Jones, AJ Foyt, Alan Bobby Unser, Mario Andretti, even Jim Clark and Graham Hill. I could go on if you would like. But for a moment, let's mention the little guy. Something that today seems totally implausible was the norm during this time. Drivers wandering the garages looking for a drive during the month of May. Many of these drivers were guys used to driving short-track midget and sprint cars on dirt tracks, itching to get a shot to crack the field of 33. With the right team owner who had nothing to lose, coupled with the stupid amounts of bravery, being willing to risk it all just to go a little bit deeper into the corner, and a large helping of talent to avoid wrecking when they went a little bit deeper into the corner, a career could be launched by simply making the field in a crap box, more or less. Understandably, with all this going on, it was incredibly popular. Practice sessions at Indy would pretty much blow away any other race's single-day attendance. You know, for example, qualifying, I've seen estimates that generally seem to put it around 200,000 people showing up for qualifying. 200,000! That's a lot. Because of this popularity, Indianapolis Motor Speedway was the Indy 500. It was the only race the Speedway hosted 1 month a year, the month of May, for one race a year, the Indy 500. In simple terms, it was all they had, it was all they needed, until 1994. But we're getting ahead of ourselves there. However, as the 70s rolled on, various factors began to take their toll. First of all, the car you needed to win the 500 established itself. You needed something mid-engine, you needed wings, you needed good aero, you needed a good engine. You no longer could outthink with crazy off-the-wall ideas because it had been established what works at the Speedway. Instead of being able to make massive leaps and make massive advances, it was now about making smaller advances to gain the same level of performance. However, those last 0.2 of a second, for example, are always the most difficult to find. As the cars became more and more similar, obviously it's about doing something better than someone else, but when everybody's got something that's more or less the same, it's all about how well you do that thing that is more or less the same, so costs begin to rise. Not to mention, the little guy drivers mentioned earlier, the dirt, midget, and sprint car drivers, were beginning to be squeezed out of the sport, as the cars became more akin to what we think of today as a modern open-wheel car with wings and slicks. Proven skill in a midget and sprint car became far less relevant. Add in the mid-70s economic and oil crisis issues that took a toll on all of racing and people's interests in cars and the way they view them, the golden age had begun to wane. Now don't get me wrong, They still absolutely packed stands for the 500, and it remained a top-tier, truly special, one-of-a-kind event. The 500 was never in any danger of going away during those years. However, when you look back at it historically, the race had changed significantly from the mid to late 70s compared to what it was going into the 70s, in the early 70s. So what about the United States Auto Club? Who is USAC? USAC sanctioned the Indy 500 in the championship car series that surrounded the 500, essentially the IndyCar series of the time. However, it's important to note that USAC was basically controlled by the Speedway. The 500 was the Speedway, and the way USAC remained in control of racing. In a more modern example, this is somewhat similar to NASCAR and Daytona today. They are both separate, but one and the same. Neither would exist as they do without the other. Because of how important the Indy 500 is to the world of racing, on top of USAC being in the position that they were, the whole world for them revolved around the 500. While there was a series surrounding the 500, with many of the same cars and drivers, it never received enough promotion and, well, nobody cared. Simply put, if it wasn't the 500, USAC didn't give a damn. Understandably, as time went on, this started to piss off the team owners. By this point in time, in the late 70s, many of the team owners had become businessmen as well as racers. They started to see the money being left on the table for the sport. After all, with such a strong attendance for the Indy 500 and the whole month of May that surrounds it, a series built upon the same drivers in the same car and the same formula, more or less, should be doing better than what it was. So with all of this happening in the background, the Speedway lost its leader. In late 1977, Tony Holman died. He was the owner of the Speedway at the time, the man who brought it back after World War II, and was hugely important in making the Speedway what it was able to become. The Indy 500 would not be the same without Tony Holman. He was that important. And to make matters worse, in early 1978, a plane crashed, killing 8 USAC officials on board. While it's impossible to know what effect this had on the course of racing history, it probably didn't help ease the tension at all. And of course, the castle was left without a king. It was against this backdrop that Dan Gurney, highly respected driver, race-winning driver, Formula 1 winning, Le Mans winning, basically doing everything, his cars won Indy, the man, basically, wrote the now famous white paper in 1978. The chips were down. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and read this now. And I quote, "Over the past 3 or 4 years, I've had conversations with almost all of the car owners and team directors. I've had talks with drivers, with sanctioning body directors, with track owners and promoters and big sponsors and fans and other interested parties. Generally, there is an agreement that something is wrong with our sport. It is not reaching its full potential by any means, and there is great need for change. Early in my discussions, I realized that we are so intent upon racing each other that we do not stop and look to analyze our situation. In frustration, I decided that things must get worse before we will all wake up. Our sport has the potential to be financially rewarding and healthy from a business standpoint for all participants. Many of the car owners and team directors are excellent and very successful businessmen in their own lives outside of racing. We as businessmen should be ashamed of ourselves for being involved in such a prestigious sport as championship racing with all its potential, while it is as weak and disorganized as it presently is. It is truly strange that with all these heavyweights involved, we still do not have our act together. Divide and conquer still seems to be working, isn't it? Okay, what shall we do about it? First, let us digress for a moment. Let's study some history. Back in the early 70s, the status of Formula 1 Grand Prix racing was similar to our own USAC championship racing right now. The crowds were quite small, sponsors were hard to find, the news media was not overly interested, expenses were high and going higher, and the entire scene was one of disorganization. It was at this moment in time that the desperateness of the situation made them unite and form the organization called the Formula 1 Constructors Association, FICA. They appointed a man named Bernie Ecclestone as the Chief of Operations Officer and negotiator, and they made him a solemn pledge to abide by his decisions 100%. They rolled up their sleeves and proceeded to upgrade the entire sport to the point where the paying spectator crowds were much, much larger. Sponsors are numerous and happy to be involved. The media is vigorous in covering all of the events and TV, and so weekly magazines and daily newspapers on a worldwide basis. And money is coming back to the constructors and track owners in the form of larger ticket sales, more sponsorship, more prizes money, and expense money, and the spectator is getting a much bigger, better spectacle for his ticket money. The obvious fact is that the FICA has transformed the Formula One Grand Prix racing scene from what was a weak and scattered group of teams without any bargaining or negotiating strength into a bona fide business. They did it by uniting and making that no turning back commitment. They speak with one voice, that of the chief negotiator, and that voice has gained authority by leaps and bounds. Now, it is true that the championship racing scene is somewhat different from Grand Prix racing and therefore will require a slightly different organization to bring about an improvement. I only mention FICA organization as an example of something that has seceded on no uncertain terms. I think everyone agrees that the cost of championship racing has escalated to the point where it is virtually ridiculous, and at the same time, many of the rewards have not increased at all, but have actually declined when you consider the effects of the general inflation on the U.S. economy. At the moment, we the car owners are the ones who have put forth by far the most effort, by far the most financial stake with little or no chance for return, and yet, because we have been so busy fighting with each other, we have let the track owners or promoters and the sanctioning body lead us around it by the nose while they reap the benefits. USAC, for example, a negotiation with TV as though it had the TV rights when in fact, if it came down to a showdown, would in fact turn out to be ours. It is obvious that if Long Beach can afford to pay approximately $1 million per race after only 5 years of existence, established 1974, and maximum paid attendance of 70,000 so far, that Indy with its 600,000 plus attendance, 200 for the first week of qualifying, 100 for the second week of qualifying, 300 race day for 600,000 paid attendance, and its 60-year tradition in international TV coverage could afford to spend over $2 million on the purse. If it were to be fair, as Mr. Lindsay Hopkins said, we are the ones who did more to build the stands at Indianapolis than anyone else. IMS should thank us each year in addition to our thanking them. In all of our discussions as car owners and team leaders, we have agreed that it is essential that we continue to support USAC as the sanctioning body for championship racing. The only improvement will be that USAC will work with us and support our cause and our policies as well. It should be clearly understood that the purpose of this organization is to make racing better in an overall way, not just for the car owners and drivers, but also for the track owners and promoters in the sanctioning body, the sponsors and supporters, and last but certainly not least, the racing fans and paying spectators. In the final analysis, of course, large crowds of paying spectators are the keys to success for all. Track owners and a sanctioning body who aggressively promote these big events, which by contract will feature the teams and driving stars, will get the crowds, which in turn excites the sponsors and TV networks and the crowd, thereby upgrading the entire sport business. It is my firm belief that rather than cutting the cost of racing, which in itself is nearly impossible, it is far more important to make money more readily available by increasing the popularity and prestige of the sport with the general public. Tracks that refuse to put forth the necessary enterprise and promotion in order to meet the minimum purses should not be allowed to hold races. Another alternative is to allow our organization, this idea is borrowed from the FICA, to take over a track on a reasonable lease agreement, and we can do the promotion and the running of the race where we feel it would be successful. Still, USAC sanctioned, of course. For instance, the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim will be promoted by FICA this year, 1978. Now, how do we get there from here? As I see it, the first step is to analyze our situation, get together, and form the organization. Let's call it CART, or Championship Auto Racing Teams. Once we agree to the fact that CART is needed and we must outline what we want to do and how we should accomplish it, I believe that the organization can be operated by a staff of 3 people. 1 director negotiator, 1 secretary, and a staff accountant and gopher if needed. He will need a air travel card, a telephone credit card, and an expense account. It is rumored that Bernie takes none of this. He only works on a 2% commission of everything that is done through the FICA. It appears that a showdown with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is or should be the first target. They are the ones who can afford it. We should renegotiate the TV contract, again our rights, not theirs, and we should double the purse. Other tracks should be negotiated with on a basis of what is a reasonable amount of revenue to come from all sources such as TV, gate receipts, advertising sponsors, etc. The entire picture should be shared from the standpoint of cooperation rather than killing each other. We must work together to learn how to upgrade the overall marketing, advertising. If CART can send in drivers and media material beforehand to the newspapers, the TV stations, the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the various civic organizations and schools, etc., then we should do so. It is vital that we solve the riddle of getting more money coming in from spectator and sponsor advertisers and TV networks so that there is a bigger pie to carve up. The only way for our demands for more money in the form of prize fund can have any validity is if the money is there in the first place. Unless we reach the point where we can see the books of these various tracks, we will be negotiating from a position of ignorance. It seems to me that we could all be further ahead if we work together rather than be divided. We must see the tax returns and books. With the correct program of exposure, a fuel company can still get the right sort of benefits from being the exclusive championship series sponsor. Cigarettes, whiskey, banking, unions. We need a very aggressive sales promotion team with super people heading it. How do we finance this championship auto racing team's operation? Entry fees, percentage of the purse, etc.? I'm open to suggestions. Someone, our man from the Perspective Karts organization, must be part of all of Dick King's negotiations with track promoters and television people and series sponsors, etc. Dick King being the USAC president. And that's the Dan Gurney white paper. I wanted to read that because it is something that even still to this day is so incredibly relevant to racing as a whole and is still so meaningful. That was essentially the Declaration of Independence for CART. The organization was formed in late 1978, began racing in 1979. Most of the front-running teams from the USAC series and from the 500 had joined CART. An agreement was made that CART teams would participate in the 500, which remained a USAC-sanctioned race actually up until 1997. The teams knew they needed the 500 to lend viewers and legitimacy to their series, and the Speedway needed the teams to keep their only cash flow, the Indy 500, operable. Cooler heads had prevailed. Within a few years, the struggling USAC Championship Series would fail. CART would take over open-wheel racing in America outside the month of May. Within 15 years, CART in the Indy 500 would reach a new peak. Within 25 years, it had all burnt to the ground.